Hello and welcome back to the Military Time. Today, shocking developments out of Minsk, Belarus. A military revolt is reportedly unfolding, with parts of the armed forces turning against long-time strongman Alexander Lukashenko. What started as rumors is now turning into what some are calling total chaos in the capital. It's important to note, some of these reports are unverified, but the situation is escalating quickly, and we're analyzing every angle, political, military, and regional. So buckle up. Here's the full breakdown: who is revolting, why, what the potential outcomes are, and what this could mean for Belarus and the wider region. First, let's look at the backdrop. Belarus has long been under Lukashenko's iron grip. He has ruled since 1994, consolidating power over decades, suppressing dissent and maintaining tight control over both civilian institutions and security forces. In recent years, his ties with Moscow have deepened. Russia's influence over Belarus is no secret, particularly in military matters. In fact, Belarusian military decisions, training, procurement, and doctrine are heavily influenced by Russian military standards. So how is the Belarusian military structured today? The General Staff, located in Minsk, oversees operations. The ground forces are relatively small. Estimates put the Belarusian ground forces at around 18,000 active personnel. There are also internal troops under the Ministry of Interior, about 12,000 strong, who have traditionally been used for internal security rather than external defense. On top of that, Belarus fields a 465th Missile Brigade, armed with tactical ballistic missiles including Iskander systems, which reports directly to the General Staff. Equipped with but in my HUSRT, YISTEMS, NITS-LIKEBM 30PURELO, I logistics and set my SUV, I of ME forces. Now, what triggered this revolt? Sources claim that a significant number of Belarusian units have refused to follow orders from Lukashenko. Some units are reportedly demanding political reform, an end to arbitrary rule, and even the removal of Lukashenko himself. There are claims, not yet fully confirmed, that certain special operations forces historically loyal to the regime are now split, with parts siding with the revolt. The reasons are likely complex: years of repression, economic hardship, and Lukashenko's increasingly erratic alignment with Russia. Importantly, this is not just a spontaneous uprising. Senior officers are allegedly involved. Intelligence from inside military circles suggests that some commanders have quietly aligned themselves with dissident factions. These are not low-level conscripts, but higher-echelon figures uncertain about their future under Lukashenko's rule. Let's assess the battlefield picture in Minsk. Reports from the capital say that tanks and armored vehicles have been deployed in key districts. There are eyewitness claims of gunfire near military installations, although it's not yet clear how sustained or widespread the fighting is. Communications are reportedly disrupted in several areas. Phone and internet lines may be partially cut, suggesting either regime forces are trying to contain news, or the rebels are imposing communication blackouts. Simultaneously, protesters have flooded the streets. Some are ordinary civilians, but others are said to be reserve military personnel, possibly joining the military elements in revolt. Why now, you might ask? There are several possible catalysts. 1. Combat readiness inspection. In March 2025, Lukashenko ordered a sweeping combat readiness check of the Belarusian armed forces. This could have exposed deep fissures within the military, revealing not just gaps in preparedness, but loyalty. 2. Growing Russian dependency. Though Belarus claims to be sovereign, its dependence on Russia for weapons, training, and doctrine has grown. For some nationalist-leaning officers, that may feel like a betrayal of Belarusian autonomy. 3. Domestic repression. Lukashenko's crackdown on dissent has been brutal, especially since the disputed 2020 elections. International observers and domestic critics have repeatedly questioned his legitimacy. 4. Nuclear tension. Belarus has conducted tactical nuclear inspections alongside Russia, and it has been reported that it hosts Russian tactical nuclear weapons. That raises the stakes enormously. Perhaps some officers fear becoming a launch pad for conflict, not just a client state. What are the possible scenarios that could unfold? Regime collapse. If enough military units fully side with the uprising, Lukashenko could be forced out. That would probably trigger a power vacuum, but also a rapid consolidation effort by reformists or military juntas. Negotiated settlement. There could be talks between rebel military commanders and Lukashenko or his close allies. A transitional government might be proposed, possibly with external oversight or guarantees from Russia. Russian intervention. This is perhaps the biggest wild card. Russia has a vested interest in Belarus. If Moscow sees the rebellion as a threat to its strategic interests, especially given nuclear assets on Belarusian soil, it could intervene militarily or politically to restore order. Civil conflict. Worst case, the revolt escalates into a broader civil war. Belarus is not a large country, but if fractured, any prolonged fighting in Minsk would be catastrophic both for regime forces and civilians. Wider geopolitical implications are huge. For Russia, if the revolt succeeds, Russia risks losing its firm foothold in Belarus. Moscow has long treated Belarus as a strategic buffer, so a regime change could threaten its control over key ground and military assets. For Ukraine and NATO, a destabilized Belarus dramatically shifts the security balance in Eastern Europe. NATO would watch closely, possibly reinforcing its eastern flank. Ukraine might find a more favorable neighbor or a more dangerous one, depending on who emerges. For Belarus itself, a revolt could offer a long-awaited chance at reform, but the risk is enormous: civil war, economic collapse, or a return to authoritarianism under new leadership. Let's look closer at Lukashenko's likely response. Historically, Lukashenko has crushed dissent ruthlessly. He relies not just on the military, but also on his internal security apparatus, the paramilitary internal troops under the Ministry of Internal Affairs. He could use them to defend key government buildings, arrest rebel officers, or impose a curfew. He also might request direct Russian support, not just politically, but in terms of intelligence, troops, or even more extreme measures. On the other side, he may attempt propaganda, claiming any revolt is driven by foreign saboteurs or Western-backed conspirators to delegitimize the uprising among ordinary Belarusians. What about the rebel military faction? Their challenge is steep. They need to win over large parts of the military. Only certain units are said to be backing the revolt, while others remain loyal. They must also control or neutralize key infrastructure, communication hubs, airports, commandant, control centers, and missile brigades like the 465th. Disarming or co-opting nuclear or missile units will be critical and very risky. They must convince the public. To survive and succeed, they'll need popular legitimacy. Street protests help, but they also need a political program, or at least promises of reform beyond just Lukashenko must go. And they must plan for post-revolt governance, what comes after Lukashenko. Without a clear successor or transitional government, chaos could worsen. Now, what are analysts saying? Some military analysts argue that Belarus has long maintained a fragile force with limited readiness and aging Soviet-era equipment, despite claims of modernization. The army is relatively small compared to major powers, and only a fraction is considered fully combat-ready. This suggests that if a revolt is indeed underway, it might not be quickly crushed, but neither is it guaranteed to win. Others point out that Belarus's defense doctrine has prioritized internal control. Units like Special Operations Forces have been used not just for external defense, but to suppress internal dissent. Rebel leaders need to have calculated this risk. They presumably know their betrayals could provoke a deadly internal crackdown. Let's not forget the nuclear dimension. Belarus's 465th Missile Brigade is a major asset. The fact that tactical nuclear weapons are reportedly part of Belarus's arsenal or at least under inspection, means any regime change could have strategic consequences far beyond Minsk. If rebels can seize or neutralize these capabilities, they gain enormous leverage, but if not, regime loyalists could use them as a nuclear bargaining chip, or worse. What should the international community do? 1. Monitor closely. Diplomatic missions, NGOs, and media outlets must watch for signs of escalation or repression. 2. Prepare humanitarian support. If the revolt spirals into violent conflict, civilians will be vulnerable, especially in the capital. International organizations should ready exit plans, aid corridors, and refugee support. 3. Engage carefully. Western and regional powers need to balance moral support for reform with the risk of being seen as meddling. At the same time, Russia's response needs to be understood. The Kremlin will not stand idle if its strategic interests are threatened. In conclusion, what appears to be happening in Belarus is nothing short of a historic inflection point. A military revolt in Minsk, if real and sustained, could topple decades of Lukashenko's rule, or plunge the country into bloody infighting with global repercussions. This is not just a political crisis, it is a strategic one. For Belarus, for Russia, for Europe, the stakes could hardly be higher. We will keep tracking this story closely and bring you the latest developments as they unfold. Stay with us for live updates, expert analysis, and exclusive intelligence, because in moments like these, frontline truth matters more than ever. Thank you for watching Military Time. If you found this analysis helpful, please like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon for instant alerts. We'll be back with more.